All right. Good evening, everyone. Um, Compliments of the season. I don't know if you can hear me, and just put up a chat that you can hear me. So I want to welcome everyone to today's class, and this 5 p.m. We want to give 5 minutes so that everybody can be able to join, and then we can introduce the facilitator for today. So my name is Godson Onko, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's class. Right. So as you join, drop your names on the chat box for attendance, right, and your party as well. Yeah. Right. So let's get our party members to join. So you can reach out to people that are not here already, talk to them and tell them that class is on. Right. So let's do that within the next 4 minutes, and by 5 minutes after 5, we are going to be starting the class. So thank you so much. All right. Good evening, guys. Once again. So we're going to be starting now, and I hope that the other people will join us while the class is on, right? So today we are going to be talking about advocacy and policy influencing, and it's a very important topic, and I think it's also a very interesting one that you want to learn about. And I will urge you to pay a rapt attention to the facilitator, and when it's time to ask questions, any question that you think of, just ask him, because he's an expert in the field, right? And we are going to learn a lot from the wealth of his experiences. So I'm going to introduce the facilitator, and I'll let him take the stage for today. Our facilitator for today is Busayo Oluwadamilare Morakinyo, which is known as BOM. BOM has an unsullied passion for nation building and social impact. He has a background in history and international relations and master's degrees in humanitarian and refugee studies. He leads the community engagement at Connected Development and emerging social accountability that seeks improved service delivery from public servants. Busaya believes civil obligation is a cruise of civil rights and daily encourage active citizenry through his Pan-African engagement. The stage is up now for Mr. BOM. Thank you, sir. It's great having you on our platform today.
Yeah, thanks a great deal. Please confirm if you can hear me. Can I also have, okay, I can share my screen now. Please, can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly, loud and clear.
All right. Thanks. Just to also say that I have updated my profile. I think Lisa didn't ask for my updated profile. I used to work with Connected Development, but I'm no longer with Connected Development.
Oh, sorry about that, sir.
It's all good.
That was an oversight on my part.
No, it's all good. I know this is like a plug and play now. We've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
So it's quite understandable. Good evening, everyone. And great. It's there's no better time for this session to come. This is going to probably be one of my fastest classes on electoral college, because today is a very interesting day. It's the day before the day to Christmas. So there's a need for everyone to also go ahead and prepare for the celebrations. And I also salute the courage of the entire team, starting from the convener himself, Mr. Kunle Lawal, to every other person who ensures that this happens every time. Lisa, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. So we're just going to dive right in. I hope to do this class for 30 minutes, then take questions for 30 minutes. I'm so sorry about that. I have another meeting to jump in at 6 p.m. and it's really very important that we do this. But as much as possible within the time we have, we'll dive deeper in. I know that we've touched on so many courses, so many subjects in this conversation, and I always think that advocacy and policy influencing is also very important, especially when you want to look at it from the perspective of democracy and civil rights, the right to protest for people who obviously equate advocacy to protesting. Part of what the democracy gives to us is the right to advocate and to also influence policies. Talk about the military time. It was almost difficult for you to speak to power in those times, but there's a whole lot that has changed. We're not there yet, but we're moving forward gradually to where we're supposed to be. Our democracy is quite nascent. It's just about 22 years of the civil rule, and we're doing not too good, but we're at least moving. We're seeing signs of movement here and there. So advocacy and policy influencing now becomes very, very important, because there are a whole lot of people that are doing things that are not advocacy, and there are a whole lot of people that are trying to influence the policies of government, and they're doing it the wrong way. And so no matter where you are, be you in government, be you aspiring to be in government, those of us who have probably done a luta when we were in the university, or those of us who would always hit the streets in terms of protesting or ensuring that your voice is heard. You're not actually doing anything too wrong, but we just have to take you through this series so that you'll understand better ways to do this. And I think advocacy cuts across every sector, the private sector, the public sector, government, even civil servants too do a whole lot of advocacy, especially around welfare. And so you have NLC, TUC, you have ASU, NASU, and the likes. I mean, all of these groups, are just groups to protect the rights, of their members. But as citizens of a country, of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, it's also important that we learn how to advocate in the right way, and not just advocacy, policy influencing, which I'll be able to explain the differences as we move on. So please, if you have any question, just feel free to either drop it on the chat box, or when we get done, I can be able to respond to those questions. Permit me to, I'm trying to set my timer so that I don't move too much. Okay, great. 20 minutes start. Okay, thank you very much. I hope everyone can see my screen, because I just have only my screen up. I hope everybody can see my screen. Lisa, please, can you confirm?
Yes, we can. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. So let's dive in. The goal is to strengthen the advocacy and policy influencing skills of those of us on this call for effective engagement with policymakers and duty bearers. So this is tied, to engagement with policymakers and duty bearers. It's very important. These two classifications are very important. Who are policymakers? Policymakers are those who we have given the responsibility in terms of probably when we cast our votes to get who a president is. The president comes in and he appoints, his ministers, he appoints various people here and there. So for us, advocacy is important to engage with those policymakers and duty bearers, people who are bound by duty to perform a service, to the nation. And let's just also put it in perspective that these people we're talking about, or these people we call policymakers and duty bearers, they're actually supposed to serve the people. They're supposed to serve us. So if you find yourself in any elective appointed position in the country, you're not doing the people a favor. The people did you a favor to put you there because you probably told them you had the capacity to be there. So you're not doing them a favor, you're actually serving, and which is the consciousness we're trying to imbibe, or push to people with the Electoral College. And that explains our goal. So the objective of this session is very simple. Number one, we need to identify relevant issues for advocacy and policy influencing. So anywhere you see PI, it's policy influencing. Second objective is to analyze the policy influencing environment. You're going to learn about that, though in passing. Assess the policy structures and procedures. We may not touch on these today. But I'll just gloss over it so that we'd have an idea. Strategize a PI goal with different stakeholders. Now, this strategy session is supposed to be for a physical class. It's supposed to be an engagement. It's supposed to be an exercise everyone is supposed to run, but because this is a virtual class, it's almost difficult for us to do this. I'm not sure we've been able to do this on any of our classes, but I mean, maybe soon enough when the Electoral College continues to grow, we would be able to touch on this, do this physically. Then practice skills for influencing the behavior of decision makers. Then ultimately we're supposed to be able to formulate a policy influencing plan. These three things, I'm not sure we're going to be able to touch it because it's almost going to, except I give us as an assignment, and we'll probably have another, if Lisa allows us to probably come back and now look through those assignments to be able to help us or to test our understanding of what we're sharing. Okay, so let's look at definitions and concepts. So policy influencing is the deliberate and systemic process of influencing the policies, number one, practices, and the behavior of different targeted stakeholders. These things are very important. Number one, influencing the policies. What are the policy blueprints? What are the policy roadmaps? For example, in 2015, the APC government was tending towards a welfare state in some kind of way. So when I talk about welfareism, I'm talking about 5,000 to the poorest of the poor, school feeding program, and all of those interesting innovations or policies that they have. So it's policy influences of influencing those policies, those kind of policies. People are running for election. They are saying a whole lot of things now. Those are policy roadmaps, policy blueprints. Eventually, anyone who wins, I hope some people do not win, but anyone who wins, they're still going to have policies. So policy influencing is the deliberate and systemic process of influencing those policies, the practices, and the behavior, which is very, very important. Currently, we have some presidential candidates who have been running away from the media. It's a behavior. And if you're not careful, if people like that get into office, they are not going to speak to Nigerians. I remember during the COVID period, we were practically begging our president to speak to us. He always had that demeanor. It always seemed like he didn't care, right? And so when he became president, it was further reinforced of different targeted stakeholders. So when we talk about targeted stakeholders, if I'm interested in education, your interest may be in healthcare. So my target stakeholder is probably the Minister of Education, but you're interested in healthcare, so your targeted stakeholder is probably the Minister of Health, NCDC, name it, the guys in the health sector. So this is important. I put all of these things in context that are most influential on the issue. Very important, because you cannot be talking about education and you're going to meet the Minister of Health. You can't know, it doesn't work. So your stakeholders, must be people who are influential, on the issue and who has the ability, to make the kind of changes you want to see. It's very, very important in the definition. Involving beneficiaries and increasing their ownership and capacity on the issue. Activities can be singled out, or a mixed strategy can be applied, in which joint forces and concerted actions, increase the effectiveness of policy influencing intervention. So what this is basically saying is you can use a single out method, or you can have a combination of various strategies. So the long and short of the definition and the concept of policy influencing is the fact that it must, number one, be deliberate. It must also be a systemic process of influencing policies, practices. How do these people behave? How do they act? And their behavior, of the stakeholders you're interested in that are most influential on the issue. And like I said, you have to know your target stakeholders. It's also involving beneficiaries and increasing their ownership and capacity on the issue. Right? It's very, very important. And we said that activities can be either singled out. You can take one approach, or you can take, a mix of various strategies and approaches, in terms of driving your message towards influencing that said policy you probably have an issue with. So let's look at the difference between advocacy and policy influencing. Advocacy covers a much broader range of activities that might or might not include policy influencing, right? Advocacy is simply, so what we're currently saying here is the fact that, advocacy is broader. Advocacy is like the father, of policy influencing. Policy influencing is a subset of advocacy, because advocacy, covers a broad range of activities. Advocacy also covers lobbying. Advocacy also covers protest. Advocacy also covers, name it. There's this stuff we do for call to actions, petitions. Advocacy covers a broader range of issues, but let's just string on policy influencing for today. Advocacy is also described as, all non-violent and legal activities that can influence policies, practices, and behaviors. So the moment your advocacy, involves you taking arms or taking weapons against the state or against another person, it's no longer advocacy. That's full-blown criminality or terrorism or banditry, as the case may be. But policy influencing, is very important because it's a subset of the entire circle of advocacy. And I think that's very important for us to note. So when do we advocate? We advocate when there are problems that affect disadvantaged communities. A very good time to protest, for example, or advocate, advocate rather, not protest, is when there are problems that affect disadvantaged communities. And what does this mean? I know that there was a time when a certain individual wanted to take over the entire PAPI. For those of you who are in Abuja, it's now called Maitama 2. Very influential person, wanted to take over the entire, and it was going to displace a whole lot of people. I know that Amnesty International was at the forefront of that campaign, not because the issue affected Amnesty International directly, but because Amnesty International realized that a whole lot of disadvantaged communities, are going to be moved out of that place. You understand? So, I mean, if you're asking yourself, when is a good time to advocate? When you know that there are problems that affect, disadvantaged communities. For example, we have communities who just experienced flooding. They may not be able to speak for themselves because they are vulnerable. That's a good point, to advocate, because that without that advocacy, or if nothing is done, it's going to have a devastating effect, and further probably throws people into multidimensional poverty, they're experiencing. The second point where you can advocate is when there's a blockage in our program. So what this simply means is, if the government says, okay, for example, Empower is it's always been a very interesting conversation. Now, if the government promises that we're going to give graduates 10,000 naira, for example, and all of a sudden the government comes into power or something happens and the 10,000 stops coming, it's a good time to advocate when there's a blockage in our programs, when there's a blockage, for example, when there's a blockage with the social media bill, right? When there's a blockage, for example, when they said women, I know that there was a part of the Electoral Act that spoke to women and it was jettisoned from the Electoral Act. That was a good time, for people to come out to protest. Sorry to advocate. I don't know why I'm interchanging protest and advocacy, and probably because I'm not excited about Nigeria today. Another good time to advocate is when you understand the root cause of the problem. So, for example, most times what we treat as Nigerians are the symptoms, not the problems in themselves. So that Eureka moment for you when you're walking and you understand that, the problem of scarcity of petrol product is not because the fuel station doesn't want to sell, but because XYZ is happening. Bam, it hits you like that. It hits you like that moment when your eyes just opens and you discover the root cause of the problem. It's a good time, to begin an advocacy. So, for example, I know that there are things that happens around you that you really do not pay attention to, but one moment you realize that, this is even a problem in itself. That's a good time, to advocate. You can also advocate when there's a policy implementation gap. So what this simply means is, so for example, when the school feeding project started in 2015, one of the things the DFID then, there was still DFID, I think, still led by Pearl, DCP, I think Pearl. Then one of the things that brought us in to do was to set up a grievance mechanism system to troubleshoot the implementation of the school feeding project and the distribution of 5,000 naira to the poorest of the poor people. I know that on that grievance mechanism engagement, there were a whole lot of policy gaps we noticed and we had to advocate for, because the communities that those funds or those the food for the children were supposed to benefit, there were challenges, that the government wasn't looking at. So it was a good place for us, to start up an advocacy to ensure that the government was doing the right thing in terms of the implementation of that policy. So this is a very, very important point where you can advocate. You can also advocate when there's a link between the local, national, regional, or international, when there's a link between local, national, regional, and international concerns. For example, education. Education is a basic right as enshrined by the United Nations humanitarian law, I think, human rights, sorry, UNHCR. Education is a very, very fundamental part of people's rights. Yeah. Now, you obviously know that the lack of education within a locality has a local effect, it has a national effect, it has a regional effect, and of course, there are international concerns. Insecurity, the banditry, Boko Haram, insurgencies, all of these issues are big issues that are not only local in themselves, they are not only national, they are not also only regional, but they have international concerns. You understand? So when you notice those kind of issues, those are good places for us to advocate. Last but not the least, when you have to demand for the rights of people. You see, one of the things that democracy gives to us is liberty, the freedom to express yourself, the right to life. The right to life is sacrosanct. Nobody can just wake up and take away another person's life. And so when Deborah was killed in Sokoto, that was a good time for our advocacy around the protection of the lives of people. When scores of people are killed in southern Kaduna, for example, I saw the gory pictures yesterday of the mass burials. Those are very good points for us to advocate because we're demanding for the rights, of people, be it human rights or rights of even being a person. Poverty is an aberration to fundamental human rights. It's also a good time for us to advocate. So let's look at types of advocacy very quickly. On types of advocacy, you have the geographical advocacy. Now, geographical advocacy speaks about duty bearers at either local. There are some issues that are not the business of Buhari. There are some issues that concerns your local government chairman. So you must be able to understand the context, of your type of advocacy. Is my advocacy a local advocacy? Is he talking about cleaning the street? Is he talking about cleaning the gutters within my council, within my local government? It's not going to be too wise for us to take those kind of issues and say, Buhari should come and clean, the gutter on your street because it's causing malaria, right? Is it a national conversation? Is it a national problem? Because and definitely we must have gone through various series of courses that probably taught us about the local government, the state government, and the federal government, right? Is this conversation, does it have to even do, because there are some issues that are supposed to be state-based, that unfortunately we just drag Buhari into it. No wonder the man is even tired. He has always been tired since 2015 though. But he's even more tired. He just wants to leave, but doesn't want to resign. Because, it's very important for us to highlight all of those. Is it an international issue? Climate change, for example, is not just a local problem. It's not just a national problem. It's a global problem. And so when you see COP27, COP26, COP28, these are conversations and advocacies that are on that national level. Timing is also a very important type of advocacy. What time do you think you need to advocate? For example, this Christmas holiday is a good time for advocacy. It's a good time for advocacy on good governance. So, for example, some people that have been traveling to their villages, back to back in the last 30 years may not be able to travel. Reason is because the price of transportation is skyrocketed. Flights are overly expensive, overblotted. The roads are not safe. There is banditry attack. The Southeast is not too safe. You either get kidnapped or get killed. These are issues, right? So a very good time to advocate is probably towards celebration days. Everybody's more relaxed. Everybody's more in a holiday mood. This is a good time for you to come up with your own kind of advocacy. I like the fact that 2023 is an electioneering year and politicians are going to go back home. You may not see them in Abuja, but you probably see them back home because they want to make a statement for you to vote them again. This is probably an amazing time, for you to advocate in terms of understanding, for the lack of a better word, the anatomy of advocacy as it is. Another type of advocacy, this is mixed together, the single issue or range of issues advocacy. A single issue, for example, could be education, right? Now, but education also may have a range of advocacy issue attached to it, because the lack of education, for example, is going to probably increase youth restiveness. If you connect youth restiveness to banditry and social vices, or the incidences of insurgency and terrorism, it's now interconnected. So is your advocacy just going to focus on one issue, or is it going to just focus on a range of issues that probably are interconnected, or those issues that find itself in an ecosystem that you cannot do without? So these are very important in understanding the types of advocacy we have. Let's look at dimensions of advocacy very quickly. The dimensions of advocacy, well, I have about 9 seconds. The dimensions of advocacy are very important, and most times I like to stay on this, because if you do not understand the dimension, trying to become an advocate would be a very difficult task. It will be a very difficult thing for you to do. And there are a whole lot of misconceptions about who an advocate is, or the people that call themselves comrades. I don't know if we have comrades on this call. There's some people that call themselves comrades. I've never liked that word, comrade. Then for those of us who probably work or own civil society organizations, also, you may be making a very terrible mistake if you do not understand the dimensions of advocacy. And I'm going to go through these very quickly. Now, understand that the effect of all of this conversation is to help us influence policies, right? Which is policy influencing. So please keep policy influencing in your mind also. The first level in the dimensions of advocacy, for example, is when you advocate for the beneficiaries and the marginalized. When you advocate for, that means you are speaking for a group of people. They may have not even understood how challenging that issue is that you're talking about to them. But because you think that their human rights have been abused, or they're marginalized, or name it, one reason or the other, they cannot speak for themselves, you come in and you begin to speak for them. You begin to advocate for them. It's one level. I mean, anybody can do this. You're walking by the street and you hear a woman shouting. Her husband is probably beating, or trying to inflict harm or hurt or injury on her. You hear her shouting and screaming, and you come in and advocate for her, right? That's for, it's for the beneficiaries. It's for the beneficiaries, and marginalized. The next level, which is a very important level, if your advocacy just stops at the level where you're the one speaking for community or the marginalized people, it's good, but I don't think it's good enough, So I'll throw in the other thoughts, which is advocacy with the marginalized, with the beneficiaries and the marginalized. Just for random checks, so that I'm not speaking to myself, can you guys drop a chat if you are, probably following, if you can hear me? I'm seeing a whole lot of things pop up on my screen. Can you probably drop a chat if you can just say, give me a thumbs up, or can someone unmute their mics and just confirm that you can hear me, please?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly, loud and clear.
Thank you very much, my brother. The next level is with the beneficiaries and the marginalized. Remember, the first is for the beneficiaries and the marginalized. The second level is with them. Now, so you've moved your advocacy from you just speaking for them to the point where you are now speaking with them. You've empowered them enough with the right kind of information, with the right kind of consciousness. They are now beginning to understand that their rights are being abused. You know that before, when it was just you speaking for them, they probably didn't understand. But because of the hard work you've put into your advocacy in terms of bringing them on board, you're now speaking together. So it's now myself and them was speaking on the issue. Who are we speaking to? We're speaking to the duty bearers, the targeted stakeholders. So let's put it in context. We're talking about basic education in our community. You understand? So the people do not even understand that education is their basic rights, right? So you come in and you're speaking for them. These people need to be educated. These people need to be educated. Now you've moved from the level where you're speaking for them, to beginning to speak with them. And you're saying to them, or you people are now saying to the duty bearers together, guys, our people need education. Our children need education. But it shouldn't just stop there, because the highest level in terms of the dimensions of advocacy, is when the beneficiaries and the marginalized themselves begins to speak for themselves. Because, see, when you probably get into community, you may not even understand the context of the community. You may not understand the local context. You may just be doing random good. But advocacy is much more than you doing random good. Advocacy is supposed to lead to a series of spiral effects whereby, the targeted stakeholders are taking action, right? So the moment you make it about yourself alone, if you get discouraged and leave that advocacy, you've completely abandoned those people to their faith, right? So your advocacy does not have weight if it's just you speaking about the issue. The moment the beneficiaries begins to speak with you, it takes a totally different turn. So what I mean is practical experience is, it's easy for government to clamp down on one voice. It is difficult for government to clamp down on so many voices. It's also now more difficult for government to clamp down on the voice of the people who are the ones who are supposed to elect them back into office. And this is like the dimension of what we're talking about. So no matter how cocky any politician is now, in fact, you should begin to fear those ones that are even more cocky during the electioneering season, and begin to, calculate the amount of suffering that is going to come, when those people eventually win, to get into office. I definitely do know that when it comes to the people, every politician will listen. But if you are just the one speaking, it's not going to hold weight. So these three dimensions of advocacy are very, very important. I cannot overemphasize it. The first level is when you're speaking for community. The second level is when yourself and community begins to speak. And the highest level of advocacy is actually at the point where the beneficiaries of your advocacy and or the marginalized people who your advocacy are targeted at have begun to speak for themselves. Now, one of the reasons why my friends or my colleagues in the civil society may not totally accept this ideology, which is just, global best practices, is because a whole lot of people want to just become celebrities out of the issues that is happening in community. You can call them cash activists. I saw this word somewhere and I laughed. They're not activists. They just want to be on the TV screens. They just want to be the ones talking about the issues. But that's not going to, bring any level of succor to the people. So for me, in my current state of mind, or what has always been my posture, is I understand that community may not understand the dimensions of this problem. So I come to them and I'm speaking to them, I'm speaking for them. It must graduate to the level where we understand the problem together, because I must have poured myself into them so much to understand that this is even a problem to them. I remember I said sometimes they don't even know that it's a problem. They don't know what the budget is speaking to. They don't know that they're supposed to have a health center. They don't know that they're supposed to have a school. They think that the House of Assembly guy or the guy in the Senate is doing them a favor. No, he's not doing them a favor. It is actually their constituents' funds. So when the person does it and put his name that is his project, no, it's not his project, it's the federal government's project. And the money is not the government's money, it's the money of the people. Now, the moment citizens understand this or communities understand this, they begin to now talk. Now, what I do is I begin to take the back seat and push them forward. So much so that in no long time, they're beginning to speak for themselves. If I can hit this level where communities are the ones talking for themselves, I have attained almost 50% of my advocacy asks by just, stimulating community to wake up to their responsibilities. I thought this was very important, so I spent a whole lot of time in it. So let's look at some principles of policy influencing. I just touched on advocacy because you cannot talk about policy influencing without stringing on advocacy, because policy influencing is a subset of advocacy, right? So let's look at some principles of policy influencing, and you can use the acronym CLASP. C stands for credibility. Why would people trust you? If you have a very terrible character, I've said this in all the classes I've taken on the electoral college. If you are a bad person, don't try to do advocacy. If you're doing it for personal aggrandizement, don't mess up the advocacy space for people who are serious and who are interested in doing this thing because they want to alleviate the sufferings of community. Because it's very important, because we have people with ulterior motives get into this stuff and they mess up the entire system for us. I've gone to communities where the people would not want to listen because other people have come and have, made money from their problems, and they have left the space so messy that when genuine people comes, the community becomes hostile. So if you don't have credibility, to thyself be true, just stay away. Go and probably lobby for government contract somewhere. Go and do something, or go and become a social media warrior for a political party and collect your 50K or your 30K. Don't meddle into advocacy. Advocacy is not a means to an end. Advocacy is actually, you speaking up for community and ensuring that the rights and privileges of community members are protected. Number two, legitimacy. Who or what gives you the right to interfere? This is very, very important. Who or what gives you the right? My first right of legitimacy as a Nigerian is because I'm a Nigerian. I went to do an advocacy in a community in Adavi local government of Kogi State. And I was meeting the acting chairman then, or the caretaker chairman, or whatever they call them, and the guy asked me, "Are you from Kogi?" I said, "No, I'm not from Kogi, but I'm from Nigeria. I'm a citizen of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And the funds that is currently being used in any state in this country is held in trust. It's actually my money. It's actually your money, but it's held in trust of the government because, understanding the idea of social contracts, I willfully gave them, the government, the right to perform on my behalf. So ideally, the government is supposed to give me feedbacks. Legitimacy. What is your local standing in the issue? The easiest way for me is the fact that I am a Nigerian. You can't change that. So are you a member? Are you a member of the community? Why do you want to interfere? People will ask you those kind of questions. You must be able to know the reason why you're doing this advocacy or policy influencing, as it were. Accountability. How transparent are you towards the deciders, towards the duty bearers, and towards the community? Because I've seen advocacies where everybody says, we no go agree. Let's go and meet these people. Let's influence them. Let's influence their policies. And at the end of the day, some people leave that place with bags of money and they sabotage the interest of community. We've seen it happen with Nigerians. We've seen it happen severally. If you have a problem with accountability, please don't dabble into advocacy. Don't dabble into, and when you're an advocacy, you don't have any business collecting anything from duty, but there are some kinds of advocacy that I don't even take water. Because for me, I understand that I must be very careful to protect the interest of community. And so, because I want to be accountable, I would double down on building the capacity of community to understand the problem so that they begin to talk for themselves, so that it doesn't feel like the duty bearers do not go behind me and say to community, that man has collected money. Why you didn't actually collect anything? You see the need why the dimensions of advocacy are very, very important. It's easier for you to work in a team than to work alone. You are easily compromised when you're working alone. But if you have a team, you guys can be able to check each other. You then understand that you must be utmostly careful. I've gone on several advocacies where they give you thanks for coming transport. You have to turn it down. Accountability is very important. Accountability is very, very important. The next principle, which is S, is service. How are you being helpful? Do you understand when to pull back? Do you understand when it's a win-win situation? Nothing is actually absolute. If it's about influencing, there must be a negotiation. If it's about advocacy, there must be a negotiation. Ensuring that negotiation, ties into a win-win situation. So for example, if we're saying that children if the law says children must not pay, the law of basic education, for example, speaks to quality, free and quality education for the first 9 years of every child, every Nigerian child, right? Now, what that means is if a state government or if a public school in a state is now collecting money from something that is supposed to be free, that's a good point for advocacy. A win-win situation is not when students are still paying school fees. No, it's supposed to be free and quality, right? So you cannot, the win-win there is when it is free and quality, because there is a constitution that speaks to that fact. One thing I missed saying was the fact that we must also understand the difference between a policy and a law. There is a difference between a policy and a law. A law is a legally binding document that binds both the state and everybody, all the apparatus of the state. So in this context, the Universal Basic Education Act is a law. It's binding. Unfortunately, in the Constitution, you cannot go to court on that basic right for education, compulsory education. Unfortunately, I've not even gotten a lawyer to explain that to me. I mean, it's a research you guys can go, and carry on. A policy, however, is just a blueprint. It's not justiciable. For example, you cannot take the Buhari administration to court because they have put an end to school feeding program, or the school feeding program is not going well. You can't take him to court. Ideally, you should be able to take the Buhari administration to court because there is no quality and free education. But that part of the law, there's a clause that makes it not justiciable, which should show every Nigerian that the constitution we currently use is one of the biggest problems we have as a country. So if you ask me, what do we do? Throw that thing away. Throw it very, very far away. Now, so let's look at one of the rights that are justiciable. If you kill anybody, the right to life creates a penalty for when you kill by manslaughter or by whatever degree murder, you should probably be jailed or be killed. That is justiciable because it's in the law. There is an act of parliament that backs it up. But a school feeding program is not in the law. So anybody can win and tell you, I mean, I'm not doing this, and you cannot do anything about it. And so it's very, very important for you to interrogate what you call the manifesto and hold it on one hand. For example, in 2015, some people said that the dollar would be equal to the naira. Some people said, very flamboyant, interesting promises. Petroleum would be sold at less than 40 naira per barrel. There's no constitutional backing for that. People, you cannot take the government to court, even if fuel becomes 500 naira. You can't take the government to court because a policy is not justiciable. The only thing that is justiciable is the laws that are backed up by the Act of Parliament. The last but not the least, power. You must understand your power base. How do you use your power base? Do we need to collaborate, join forces? What expertise do you have? You are a very good orator. You can speak. I am very good on email marketing. I can shoot emails. That's my expertise. Another person is very good on, name it. Whatsoever you're good on, you have to now collaborate. Because when there are some kinds of advocacies you're going to involve yourself in that you may not be able to pull it on. In fact, there's almost no advocacy that you can be able to pull on your own, except maybe it's within your own nuclear family, husband and wife and children. And even at that level, you need your supporters. So for example, the wife needs the children to back her, or the husband needs the children to back her, or the husband needs the wife to back him, against the children, quote and unquote, So you cannot travel alone because there's no amount of power you have that can be equated to the power of the state, especially when the advocacy has to do with the state. If you want to know how power, if you want to understand power base and power structures, go back and think about the erudite Sanusi, the former emir of Kano, and a Ganduje, for example, who is the governor of Kano. You'd see power play. You'd recognize power and you would see power, right? So most times, advocacies are better when forces are joined. And that's why the dimensions of advocacy is very important. If that is the only thing you can remember from this conversation, please hold it, take it, chew it, understand it. It would help you, to be able to fortify your power base. Sometimes you need the power of the community, the backing of the community. I've had my colleagues get harassed by politicians severally, and the only people that were able to defend them were the communities, because the communities trusted. There was credibility built in the community. So the community put themselves and say, if you want to arrest these people, you have to arrest all of us. What is your power base? Do you actually believe in your message? And maybe I throw this one in. Do you actually understand the problem? Remember, I said one of the points where you can advocate is when you understand the root cause of the problem. I've seen some people go on advocacy and, you're meeting, for example, you're meeting, you were talking education, and you are going to advocate education with the Minister of Health. Come on. You don't understand stakeholders mapping. You've not done your homework. You've not done your assignment. Who has the ability to throw the wheels of power to your favor? These are very important conversations we need to have. Now, so this is an advocacy framework. This is supposed to be like an assignment for us. But please, if you want, you can do this. It's going to really help you to understand the advocacy, how you can even start off this journey of becoming an advocate. So the first step, for example, is issue selection. What issue are you selecting? No. Don't be in a haste. Calm down and think about it. Is it education that draws you? Is it healthcare? Is it rural empowerment? Is it the economy of the state? What is that thing that you can connect to? Or what is that issue? You must understand the issue for you to be able to select that right issue. The step 2 is gather, analyze information on the issue, research. A whole lot of people go out on TV and they say what they do not know about. I've probably seen, someone going on TV, and talking, and the person was accusing Buhari for responsibility of a local government chairman. No, you must analyze the issue. What is the research saying? Has anybody done any study on this thing? I want to go read up on the study. I know that sometimes these things could be cumbersome. For you to be able to achieve success as an advocate, you must be able to do your homework. It's very important. The step 3 of what you need to do, you need to develop your aims and objectives. What are the aims of this advocacy? What are the objectives? What do I want to see as I go on this advocacy? It's very important. If you do not have your aim, if you do not have objectives, anything would begin to look like the way for you. And it doesn't make sense. You become a very scattered person, jumping from pillar to post, jumping from one issue to another, because you do not even know where you're going to. If you want to go to Lagos, you should have a Google map, or you should have someone in the vehicle who knows the way to Lagos. Sometimes the Google map will disappoint you. Sometimes the people will disappoint you. So it's not absolute. You should be able to understand, what your aims and objectives. Because if you do not know that you are going to Lagos, Lokoja would seem like the way. And if you're intending to go to Lokoja, you do not know in your mind that it's Lokoja I'm going to. You do 12 hours to Lagos and you discover you have to do another 10 hours back to Lokoja. So it's very important as a step 3 for you to develop advocacy aims and objectives. It's quite scientific. It's not just about interest alone. You must put in the work. Number 4, identify your targets. Who are your stakeholders? Who am I? So who are my target audience? What am I talking about? If I'm talking about education, the education, the EA, education administrator of the local government becomes important. The local government chairman becomes important. The SUBEB chairman becomes important. The House Committee on Education becomes important. The governor of the state becomes important. The commissioner of education becomes important. What kind of education am I talking about? Basic, tertiary? Is it basic education or secondary education or tertiary education? Am I interested in ASU issues? That's tertiary education. Because you cannot be talking about basic education and you're going to meet ASU. You must understand, your target, identify your targets, your stakeholder mapping 100%. And these are things we're going to be teaching people very soon, because we're opening up for a mentorship series for free, for people to understand, the deeper dimensions of this. Number 5, you have to identify your allies and adversaries. Who are your allies? The people who would support you. Who are your adversaries? The people who would not even want to hear your name. You have to identify them. If not, you would spend time at doing the wrong things over and over again. Wow, my time is almost up. I need to rush. Identify your resources. What resources do I have? Do I have friends on the radio? Do I have friends on TV? Do I have friends, at the newspapers who can be able to push this messaging at almost no cost? Okay, I don't have friends. I have social media, right? What am I doing with my social media? What am I doing with my Twitter? Am I just trolling people on Twitter? Permit me not to sound too moral. I mean, I'm not your moral compass, but you should be able to evaluate your resources. What resources do I have? I have 5,000 followers on Facebook. That's a resource. You don't need, money is not everything. So your resources is not really money. I have people who believe in my messaging. I have friends who are professionals in information. I have friends who are professional communicators. Can I bring them together? Identify your resources. Number 7, create an action plan. An action plan is very, very important. Create an action plan. These are not things we can do online, but in creating your action plan, you have to know you have to put them down and probably put dates and time when you're going to be doing this. When is this supposed to be delivered? Am I supposed to do this in January? There are some advocacies, for example, that are seasonal. There are some advocacies that are during the rainy season. There are some advocacies that are during the dry season, for example, so you have to create an action plan. Number 8, which is the most important, you have to implement. It's not enough to make a plan. You have to implement the plan. It's not enough to implement the plan. You have to monitor and evaluate your plan. One of the biggest challenges with the Nigerian system today is the fact that no one is monitoring and evaluating the policies of government. No one. The government in themselves is not monitoring anything. They can't even monitor themselves. The only people that are holding them to account are probably civil society organizations and those few people like Kunle Lawal who would not keep quiet, in the face of disaster. So thank you guys for listening. I hope we've been able to pick 1 or 2 things from these conversations we've had today. Like I said, I have very limited time, but all the same, I'll still open up for just about 2 or 3 questions, and then we can continue. I know that my friends at the Electoral College would probably share, because I'm starting the mentorship series next year that would focus deeper on these issues, and we're going to be able to dive deeper on some of these issues. Lisa, how are we going to do this question? I can just take only 3 questions because I have just about 2 minutes to run. So who's going to help us coordinate these questions, or should I go ahead? I can see a raised hand.
All right. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to coordinate the questions. Thank you very much for the class, sir. Yeah. Okay, so Andrew, just go ahead and ask a question. Go straight to the point. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing with us this evening. Well, I just want to understand, because I know there are strategies when it comes to getting our issues on the policy arena where we can influence policies. And I also understand that some of the policy elites, the actors, so to say, the people who are responsible for making those policies, sometimes don't want those issues to even get to the agenda, let alone being talked about. So please, I want to know some of the strategies that one could use to ensure that the issues or the problems being faced in communities get on the policy arena. Thank you, sir.
Okay, yeah, thanks a great deal. Let me answer this question. We probably answer that question so that people don't ask the same question again. Now, when you talk about, there are institutions of state, for example, that are supposed to check some of these things. And when I talk about institutions of state, I'm talking about from the executive and the legislative arm, and even the judiciary, for example. Remember, I spoke about education, and I said that for education, there's, and if there's a lawyer here, please help me check. I've been wanting to do this research. It always eludes me. Help me check on the reason why I cannot, as a citizen, I cannot sue the state government or federal government for not providing basic education. Please, any lawyer can help me check. It's a take home. Let's research on that. Now, there is supposed to be the House of Assembly who is supposed to keep the executive in check. So, for example, ideally, you are supposed to speak to your representative in parliament to be able to table those policy issues that you are talking about. So when we talk about education, if in your community there's no primary school, for example, you're supposed to identify your counselor or identify your local government chairman, identify your either House of Assembly member. Basic education is supposed to be, on the list of the state government, or identify your House of Assembly or House of Representative or Senate, representative, and get them to table this issue. So what is supposed to happen is parliamentarians are supposed to have, constituency offices where these challenges are put together and they are taken to parliament and conversations are had around it. But because our federal system and our democracy is still in its development stage, we're not there yet. I wish we were there. We're not there yet. That's why most of us are becoming advocates today. You understand? Now, see, you must understand that there are some issues the government will want to run away from, right? And I can give you 1,000,001 reasons why they want to do that. Let's take education, for example. It will take a government 20 years back-to-back investment in education for you to begin to see the dividends of education. I'm not even kidding you. So, and elections are run after every 4 years. So for me to be able to achieve that as a governor, right, of a state, I would be able to run for 4 terms, right, and invest in education back-to-back for 20 years before you see the dividends of the investment in basic education, for example, right? Now, our laws do not allow that. So some of these politicians, for example, will say, instead of me to invest in education that you would not be able to see, why don't I invest in building roads or painting the roads? Or there was a governor one time in Imo State that was building, not flyovers, that was building fences around, the major express. You know the reason why they do this? Because those are the things that are visible to the eyes of the people. Because sometimes the people are also fickle. And that's why I say sometimes communities do not understand what they should be advocating for. So when you come to community and you say to them, do you know that the lack of education is what is probably going to cause you problems in the next 20 years? Because the Boko Haram insurgencies, for example, didn't just start in 2014 or 2012. It's been a challenge that was not addressed until it became a full-blown monster, right? And one of those issues is the lack of education, for example, right? And so you refuse to train these kids in school. These kids have now seen an alternative to make the state listen, and they take on weapons. The moment they take on weapons, there's no stopping because they see it as a way of life. The same thing with banditry, the same thing with kidnapping, that these people are beginning to see it as a way of life, right? So the moment you do not invest, and these are issues that the government may not want to even talk about, but you as an individual who has understood the root cause of the problem can start up an advocacy, for example. And that's why you are taking it upon yourself as an advocate. You don't have to wait for these policymakers to put it as an agenda. In fact, social media has taught us that the moment people begin to hammer on a particular issue, the politicians take dressing and want to address it. They're addressing it sometimes it's not because they see the need to. It's because they want you to keep quiet. It's because they don't want you to talk about it. Unfortunately, there are some politicians today who do not care about how you feel or what you think. And so it's important for us as advocates or as people who want to get into politics or governance or anywhere we find ourselves in community to understand that your advocacy is supposed to be hinged around the issues. What are the issues that you connect with? Something that you're not acquiring, something that probably aches you, something that probably makes you not to be able to sleep at night. Stay on those issues. Build galvanized citizens' action, galvanize massive voices. One of the things that is going to be most difficult for any government to do is to censor social media. But guess what happened? During this administration, we saw that Twitter went off for many months, right? Now, it shows you that it is not enough to wait for these people who you elect. By the way, you can start up the conversations yourself, and this is a good time to start up those conversations. Kwado, let me just take this question from Kwado, and then we'll call it a day. Kwado, please go ahead. I hope I was able to answer the other question. There's someone raising up a hand. Can she go ahead? I know it's a female.
Yes, Kwado, but I think we have a question on the chat box. Can we read it while you wait for Kwado? Is it possible?
Okay, which of them?
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, to what extent do you keep on advocacy even when the advocacy has not been taken by the targeted stakeholders? Advocacies are not a walk in the park. Advocacies may take so many years. The petroleum industry bill, for example, it took so many years and so many governments. It started from the time of Olusegun Obasanjo, and I mean, it got signed at the time of, President Buhari. Advocacies could be boring. Advocacies could take a long time. In fact, I've seen advocacies where people die and the advocacy still continue. And that's why it's important for your advocacy not just to be about you or what you're saying alone. That's why it's important for you to galvanize the voices of citizens, galvanize voices of people who can connect to the problem you're connecting to. You understand? So that it's not just about you. Because hate it or love it, wear and tear comes in. You begin to ask yourself, it could get tiring. It could get tiring. We've been talking about, adequate funding for basic education for God knows when. Since 2004, the Universal Basic Education Act came into being. This is 2023. We're still talking about the same problems, right? It's not going to stop. Some issues, some people will leave, die, and go, and another generation will come and take up the issue from there. So sometimes advocacies do not have, a start. They have a start date. They do not have an end date. This is part of the problems. They just caught power, right? I'm so sorry, guys. So sincerely, you keep talking until the targets. Targeted stakeholders will take over the issue. And even when they take over the issue, you don't go to sleep, because the success of your advocacy or policy influencing is when there is a change in the situation. If there's no change in the situation, I as a stakeholder can take it up just for you to keep quiet. If I don't see a change in the situation, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to back down. So advocacies sometimes have a life on their own and could even stay longer than the people who started the advocacy. That's why it's important for you to go back to the dimensions of advocacy and understand that if it's just you talking alone, you can grow weary and tired. But the moment community begins to speak for themselves, because they're the ones that are feeling the problems even the most. Guys, on this call, there are some things that you will talk about today that doesn't affect you. There are some people who talk about how bad public education is. It doesn't concern them. They have the funds to put their children and their children yet unborn in private institutions, right? So when some people are talking, it's not because the issue concerns them directly. It's just because of their passion and the love for community. So let community take over that advocacy so that when you're even tired, someone in the community may wake up and take it up, because that problem connects to him directly. And if you've done your homework well in conscientizing and sensitizing community, it becomes utmostly easier for them to take over, when you either get tired or when you get discouraged. I hope I've been able to answer that question.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. I don't know if you still have time to take the Kwado question, or can she send it to you via maybe email so that you can do justice to that? Do you have time?
Yes, so I'm dropping my handles. So please just check out Busai Morake on all my social media platforms. You can also check out my website and drop your questions. I'm just dropping it on the chat box so that I can run away very quickly. Hopefully, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Sorry, I should have put them together. I'm rushing. So my email is damibusaya@gmail.com. So I've put On all of my social media platforms, Busaya Moraki, or sometimes I add Oluwadamilare, which is my middle name. You can check out my website. You can also check out, send a mail to my email. Thank you guys for listening. Congratulations once again to Electoral College on this batch. And I hope that we can make better decisions in 2023 as we move towards the elections, determine the right people to lead us to where we need to be as a country. Thank you guys for listening and have a great evening.
Thank you so much for that awesome section. Thank you. So guys, you can see all the informations on the chat. Just copy them. If you have many more questions you want to ask him, you can just email him directly and you get the question, right? So thank you so much for today's class, and tomorrow we'll have another class same time, right? Lisa, I don't know if you have any other thing you want to say. Over to you.
Okay, no, nothing really. Thank you, Godson. Thank you, everyone, and Merry Christmas in advance for our Christian brothers and sisters. But we still have a class tomorrow evening, Sha. So see you all then. Have a good evening.